everyone, I'm Dave Thomas, and today I am building the Freestyle model rocket from Custom Rockets. This is a relatively easy rocket to build, and it's also kind of a tall rocket, so it gives you a little more presence on the launch pad there. So go ahead and, as usual, check to make sure we have everything here. So inside the instruction sheet we've got the fins and the decals there. Okay, and then we need to look for, alright, we've got a small parts package, and that's got the centering rings and the thrust ring, the base to the nose cone, engine clip, and the launch lug. Okay, we have an elastic shock cord. Alright, little parachute kit in its own bag there. Alright, our nose cone, motor mount tube, and then a coupler for those two body tubes. So it looks like everything is here and ready to go. So I will go ahead and clear most of this away and we'll get started on the motor mount. Here I have the components of that small parts bag as well as the nose cone. Now the launch lug we won't do anything with for a little while, so I'm going to set it aside. For the nose cone, we're going to need a little bit of plastic cement. Alright, so we're just going to take this and we're going to run an even bead of glue here. Not very thick though, as if you get too much glue on this it'll melt it. We don't want a melted nose cone. And then simply take the base piece here, put that on, give it a little bit of twist back and forth to seat it well, and then this can be drying while we're building the rest of the rocket. Alright, moving on then to the motor mount. Okay, there should be a pre-cut slit here on the forward end of the motor mount tube, and that's what it's showing here. If your motor mount tube does not have a slit, then you can cut one in at 1/4 inch from the forward end. And just to help make sure we don't get confused back here, I'm going to write aft on the inside of the aft end of the tube. Okay, and then we need to mark 1/2 inch from each end. So there's a mark there, and a mark there. Alright, and the centering rings are going to be inside of those two marks. Now something they don't show here, but I've found to be helpful, is to take one of the centering rings and cut a notch on the inside about halfway through the material that's wide enough to fit the engine clip. Okay, just be sure you don't cut all the way through, and even if you do that, you can still mount it. It's a little bit harder though. Okay, so about like that. You can go a little deeper if you want. This will just allow a little bit more play in this so that when you go to install or remove a motor, you can bend this out of the way a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pop this in. So the forward end of the clip that just has the 90-degree bend in it, that goes in there. Alright, this one's going to go on the aft end, but it's easier to fit it this way. And you're going to put your notch over the engine clip, and that ring is going to go to that point there. All right, the forward ring, all right, our mark is also going to be on the outside like that, and then the thrust ring will go in here. All right, so go ahead and dry fit all of your parts, make sure they fit right. Okay, and then if they do, we'll go ahead and move this right about to the line that way, and we're going to move the aft one the same way. And now I'm going to take my glue here. You can use white glue or wood glue. I'm just going to run a bead of glue around the inside edge of each ring here. Okay, and then I'm just going to push the ring back until I can see the mark once again. Should be getting close. There it is. Okay, and then just take your finger and make the excess glue into a fillet there. Alright, if you get anything on top of the ring, go ahead and take that off. Okay, same thing for the aft end here. Now here I'm going to try to avoid getting glue around the engine clip, because the whole idea of putting that notch in there was to allow it to move freely. Okay, and then once again, I'm going to move that inward till we reach our other mark right there. Okay, I'm going to smooth that one in as well. Okay, and then put a little glue right around the edge here. Not too much, because we don't want a big blob of glue down inside the motor mount. And then put the thrust ring in like that, and it should stick up just a millimeter or two there. Okay, and it should be right on top of the engine clip, which it is. If you can, go ahead and remove any excess glue down inside there, and then we'll set that aside to dry. While we're waiting for the glue to dry on the motor mount, we'll go ahead and mark the body tube for the fin lines. You can use either body tube, they're both identical. I'm going to write aft at the aft end of this one, so I know that's where the engine holder is going to go. Okay, and then we're going to put this aft end down on top of this template here, and then just go around and mark the positions of all of the fins. Okay, and then you can take this to a door frame or a window, excuse me, not a window, but a drawer edge. Or if you have one of these tube marking guides that Estes makes, you can use that as well. Okay, but what we need to do then is just extend the lines about a third of the way up the tube. Okay, now they don't show it here, but go ahead and make a launch lug line as well. And to do that, I'm just going to pick a point midway between two of the fin lines here. Make a mark on that, and then I'm going to extend this the entire length of the tube. Just like that. Now if we turn the page here, this shows the launch lug at 6 inches from the aft end. So we will go ahead and measure that. Okay, make sure you're on the right line. So 6 inches will be right here, and that's where the launch lug will go. Okay, I'm going to set this aside. And now I'm going to bring up the fin stock here. And we'll go ahead and prepare the fins. Now the first thing to do is just give them sanding on the surfaces. And you can do this just with a wood block and some sandpaper. So I'm going to start with some 150 grit sandpaper here and just wrap it on the block. And then we'll just sand with the grain. Do this lightly so you don't break them apart. Now if your fins already came apart, and sometimes that does happen, just do the same thing to each fin at a time. Alright, then I'm going to change to some 220 grit sandpaper. You don't have to. 150 is usually enough, and if that's all you've got, it's fine. So this will just smooth things up a little bit more. Then take your hobby knife and cut off the little bits that are remaining attached there, and these should just fall right through. Then next go ahead and stack these together. And then using the 150 grit sandpaper again here, we're just going to smooth all the edges. So we get rid of these little nubbins here. So starting with the root edge, just stack them all together and just take and drag them over your sandpaper for a few strokes. Okay, and then change to the next edge. Do the same thing. And just keep going. Okay, now the notches here, that indicates that this is the root edge, so that's the part that's going to get glued to the body tube. Alright, the leading edge will be here, so this is facing forward, and you'll probably want to do some rounding of that to give it more aerodynamics here. If you want this to be really streamlined, you can round over the leading edge and then taper the trailing edges here. I'm not going to do that. There's a trade-off, because if you taper these edges, they're also prone to chip more often. And so if you leave these straight and this rounded, that gives you actually quite a bit of performance, but also keeps the fin stronger. Having the tapered trailing edges there will give you better performance, but it also makes the fin a bit weaker. So here I'm going to start by just taking a couple of strokes and knocking down the edges there. Okay, and then you just come back and do this some more. And I'm just rotating my wrist a little bit to do some rounding action there. And just keep alternating sides. Okay, and then check the cross section here. So it's starting to look rounded there and there. It's still a little bit square there. So that's one fin done. I'm going to do the other 2 fins off camera and then come back. Here I have all of the fins sanded and the leading edges are all rounded over there. Now at this point you can do a little bit more sanding on the faces if you want. You can add some sanding sealer and sand that, and that will fill in some of the grain. Personally, I'm going to use a filling sandable primer that will do basically the same thing as sanding sealer. So it fills in the grain here, and then when you sand it, you'll sand off the tops but leave the filled spot behind. And I'll go do that off camera. The glue on the motor mount is dry enough to work with, and so now we're going to just dry fit first of all and make sure this fits in okay, and it does. Now my personal preference is to put the motor mount clip on the same side as the launch lug here, and it just helps keep it out of the way on the launch pad. Now according to the instructions, we're just going to put a ring of glue around the inside of the tube there. I'm going to show you something you can do a little bit more to reinforce that. So first of all, I'm going to take my applicator here and I'm going to line it up so it's right below the forward ring, and my thumbnail here is down here at the aft end of the engine tube. So now I'm going to use that as a guide. So I'm going to put this straight up without touching the sides until my thumbnail hits, and I'm going to rotate that around, bring that back out. Okay, now I'm going to slide this in part way, but here I can move from side to side and such, and I can now take my applicator and run a bead of glue just on the inside edge there. So this will give a better foundation for holding than just having the glue up inside. Okay, so now here I'm going to go ahead and refine my mark. Okay, and then this is going to go in flush. And then just remove any excess glue that's sticking out of there. Okay, and we'll allow this to dry once more. The primer on my fins is dry, and now what I'll do is just take some 220 grit sandpaper here and then sand this with the grain. Now as you can see here, this clogs up sandpaper fairly quickly, so you'll want to have extras on hand. But what I've done here is the high spots get sanded away, and so they appear nearly bare again. The lower spots though remain filled with the primer, and so this smooths out the grain quite a bit. Now you can do this more than once, so if you want even smoother fins, you can apply more of the primer to it, sand it down again, and then end with whatever makes you happy there. Okay, I'm going to just get the edges here a little bit. Our root edge, we really do want to get that sanded down to wood again, so that we've got a good gluing surface. Okay, and then also we can do our leading edge once more here. This helps get rid of some of those fibers. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing to the other fins off camera and then come back. My fins are all sanded, and in preparation for gluing them onto the body tube, I'm going to take a little bit of sandpaper here. It doesn't really matter what grit, and just sand a little bit along the fin line here at about the same length as the fin. And this will just roughen up the glossy surface so that the glue has a better attachment. Alright, here we're going to take a fin and our glue. Okay, and I'm just going to run a light bead here. This is a case where more is not better because it takes it longer to dry. So I've got a bead of glue on there, and I'm going to put this down on my fin line. Okay, and I'm going to pull it back up, and I'm going to let this dry for 30 to 60 seconds and then put it back on. 30 seconds have passed, and now I'm going to put the fin back on where I had it there. And during this time, the glue has become tackier, and this will allow us to keep it from flopping over while we're putting this on. All right, now I'm going to sight down the tube, make sure the fin is perpendicular to the tube and in line with my line and with the body tube. All right, and I'm just going to let this dry for at least 10 minutes. Then I'll do the other two fins in the same manner off camera. The glue on my fins has dried, and so now we're going to put the launch lug on in a similar fashion. Okay, again we want a bead of glue here, not too thick. Alright, we made our line here earlier, so that's going to go right there. Alright, and then just sight down the rocket, and the launch lug and the line and the tube should all be aligned and parallel to each other. And once again, I'll let this dry and then come back. The glue on my launch lugs and fins are dry, so we're ready to put the fillets on. I'm just going to have some tissue here to wipe my fingers from excess glue. Alright, and all we need to do here is just run a bead of glue along the inside edges here at the root edges. And I usually do two facing fins at once. Let me just smooth that in with a finger. Okay, and then turn it and go to the next one. And as long as you keep the rocket horizontal, you can do all of the fillets at once. And I'll just let this dry on its side until the fillets have at least congealed here, and then we'll move on to assembling the upper body tube. Now, before we assemble the two body tubes together, I want to talk a little bit about painting and finishing here. So on the recommended finishing scheme that we have here, what they do is they paint the whole rocket white and then mask off about a third of the upper body tube there, and then the lower third here, and then paint those black. On mine, I'm going to shift it a little bit so that the entire lower portion will be black. The entire upper portion, up to about here or so, will be either white or a very light color. I haven't quite decided on yet. And then we'll leave the nose cone black, mainly because the nose cones that Custom uses are actually really pretty. Alright, there's no seams in them, they have a very high gloss, and so I prefer to use them as is rather than trying to paint them. So before I put things together, I'm going to go ahead and paint the upper body tube, whichever color I decide here, and then once that's done, we'll paint the lower part, the fins and the body tube, and then I won't assemble mine until I get the painting done. Here I have the upper body tube painted. The lower section of the rocket is still being painted. But we can do two things at this point. One is to install the coupler, and the other will be to install the the shot cord mount. So on our coupler, the first thing we need to do is simply find its center. Alright, and it's probably 1 inch long. Yep. And so we just need to make a mark here at 1/2 inch. Okay, and then whichever end that you choose to be the aft end, we'll put the coupler in there. So here I'm just going to put in a ring of glue, like so. Okay, and then we're just going to fit this in and kind of twist it as we go until we reach that halfway mark, and that can be drying. The shock cord mount here is on the front page of the instructions, and we want to make sure that we're not cutting out something important, and we're not. We've already finished with that. If you don't want to cut up your instructions, you can make a photocopy of this page and then cut it out from there. Okay, we can set that aside. Now here I'm going to try something that one of my viewers had recommended, and instead of just folding this one over the other and you get this big thick area due to the size of the elastic there, I'm going to cut this lengthwise. About like that, about the length of this 2 here, a little more. And the idea here then is we'll spread this open right here, and then when we fold this up, this space here will go over this part of the shock cord, and that should make it lay down a bit flatter. So now we just need to put some glue on here. You can be fairly generous with it. I'll put down a scrap piece of cardboard so I don't get my workbench all messy. There we go. Okay, and we're just going to lay this on there and spread out the 2 little tongues. Okay, and then we're going to fold the 1 up onto the 2, and then the 2 up onto the 3. Okay, and we want to squish all the air out. What we want is a nice sandwich of glue and paper and shock cord here. Okay, and then we're going to add a little more glue to the face there. Okay, now we're going to stick this into the rocket. Now when I bring this up, I'm going to create a curvature to it so it will fit inside the rocket better. And now we need to push this down at least 1.5 inches. Longer is better, so if you can get that thing down even further, that's even better for you. Okay, so just gently ease that down, trying not to get glue all over the sides yet. All right, I'm going to flip this over so the glue is now facing downward. I'm going to stick my finger in here, and now I'm going to press down upon my hand here with the tube and the shock cord mount sandwiched in between. And again, I'm trying to squish out all the air and glue so that it fits in there nicely. And you can just see it down there. Okay, and we're going to let that dry as well. I've finished painting the rocket, and here I've glued the 2 halves together just using some white or wood glue. And now we just need to add the recovery system here. So the first thing I'll do is take my nose cone here, and this I did not paint because I wanted it black anyway. And I'm just going to slide the shock cord through the eyelet there, and then tie a double knot or 2 half hitches. Okay, tighten that from all sides. And then if this is sticking out beyond the base here, like mine is, go ahead and trim that back, but not all the way to the knot. We just don't want this to get caught up between the shoulder and the body tube. And then once that's in place, just put a little dot of white or wood glue on the knot. Just kind of work that in there. Okay, and we'll let that dry. And while that's drying, we'll assemble the parachute. Here I've removed the parachute parts from the small parts bag. And so you will have to unfold the parachute sheet itself, and we'll cut that out. Okay, then you should also have these 6 self-stick buttons, and these will be used here in a bit, and some shroud line material there. I'm going to set those aside for the moment and just cut out the parachute here from its sheet. Okay, now the shroud line material is probably just one big string, so we'll need to carefully untangle this. Don't inadvertently tie knots into it. Okay, so we've got 2 ends here. Again, we'll open this up. And what we need are 3 equal pieces. Right now that's trying to super coil and create a knot there, so just gently pull it apart. Okay, so we've got 1 long piece. All right, and then I'm going to use my hands here to separate this into 3 equal ones. So we just go back and forth here on one side and the other. Okay, and when we're close then, right, there's a free end and a loop, and I'm just going to run this all the way down the other end. Alright, where I've also got a free end and a loop. They're not quite the same size, but they're close, so I'm just going to cut this right here. So now I've got 3 free ends there, and I've come back to the other end, and we'll cut off that loop and free end as well. So now we have 3 equal size shroud lines here, and these will go from corner to corner, so adjacent corners on these. Alright, so just take one of these to begin with, and then take one of these self-adhesive discs, alright, and you're just going to kind of loop the string into a hook shape like that, and it doesn't have to be perfect. And then that will go onto a corner here. All right, just mash that down. And then on the other end, you'll do the same thing. So get another disc. Okay, and just make kind of a hook on there again. And that will go on the adjacent corner. All right, and then we'll just continue this all the way around the parachute with the other 2 shroud lines. Now you do need to be careful. These aren't as strong as shroud lines that are actually tied in. So for example, most Estes kits that come with parachutes come with a pre-assembled parachute where the shroud lines are actually already tied to the corners there. If you'd like to do that, go ahead and install the buttons again, but without the shroud lines in them, and then poke a hole in the center of that button and thread the shroud line and tie it to that. Now, one thing you can do here, and if you've seen any of my videos, you probably know what's coming up. All right, in the instructions, it just has us tie this onto the nose cone, and you would do that by looping it through the eyelet. Okay, so you gather all your shroud lines there. Hopefully they're all equal. And you pass them through this. Now I'm not going to do it because I don't like to permanently attach it, but you would pass the shroud lines through the eyelet here. And if you're actually going to do this before, I would do it before tying the shock cord on. Alright, but then you bring all of your eyelets here, and you pass the entire parachute through this loop and then pull it taut, and that will permanently attach it to the nose cone. I don't want to do that. Instead, I'm going to get a snap swivel here. These you can get from fishing areas, alright, so department stores, sporting goods stores. Go to the fishing department and you'll find these. The size doesn't matter much as long as the snap part here can be attached to the eyelet on here, on the nose cone. And when it's closed down, I get it to close down here. There we go. It should be able to pivot freely around that eyelet like that. If it's binding, and this one's almost too small, but it's just right. But if it's too small, it'll bound and won't be able to move freely through here, and that can make it stick out to where it may cause the recovery system to fail because it doesn't eject properly. Okay, now I'm going to take that back off again. Okay, I'm going to close that up once more so I don't get it caught. Now I'm going to come back to my parachute here. Alright, and once more I'm going to get all of those loops around one finger. Okay, and all those corners should be about the same place, which they are. Alright, now holding that length relative to each other. Alright, now I'm going to take my loops and shrink them down and pop them through the swivel side. It's got the round eyelet. Bring those back through. Alright, so now my swivel is just hanging on the shroud lines. I'm going to pass the entire swivel up through the loops, pull the loops downward, and then tighten that. Okay, recheck the length, make sure nothing's moved. If you like where it is, then go ahead and take a little bit of white or wood glue and apply that to the knot. It doesn't take much, just a little tiny dab there. Okay, and work that in. And then once that's dried, go ahead and reattach it to the nose cone. Okay, and then when it's time to fly this, you'll simply need to put probably 3 pieces of recovery wadding down in there, one at a time. And then go ahead and fold up the parachute. There's lots of ways to doing this. I like to fold mine into a triangle here, like that. And then take the halfway point of my shroud lines and bring them up onto the triangle. Fold either side over to make the spike. Fold that spike in half and then fold it over like this again. So you get kind of a cylinder. Alright, and then you're going to feed your shock cord down inside. Alright, and then the parachute down, stuff it in, any remaining shock cord there, and then the nose cone. And then you want to do what's called a shake test. So shake this thing. The nose cone should not come out. If it is popping out, then just add a little bit of masking tape right here. Put it back. Alright, the last thing to do is to apply the decal. And this is self-adhesive. And there are actually 3 decals here. So the 2 blue flowery things are meant to be wraps. And so I'm going to cut those fairly close to the color. Okay, and the idea here is that these will go around the rocket like this, and they'll overlap just enough to give a seamless blue appearance there. Now remember, in the suggested paint scheme, the light color actually goes further down here, so it's going to be a little bit crowded. Alright, and then the Freestyle decal here is meant to go lengthwise. You could wrap it because the size is such, but you won't be able to really see what it says. I'm just going to cut around this to remove the sharp corners, so it'll have less of a chance of peeling up. Alright, now there's a trick that you can use with vinyl decals. These aren't actually vinyl, but it should work as well. And so what I'm going to do is come back with a basin of water that has just a little bit of dish detergent in it. Here I have just some room temperature water, and I've added a single drop of dishwashing detergent to it. It doesn't really matter what brand, whatever you have around. Now you can only do this on a painted rocket. If you've got a rocket that has a factory finish on it, those usually are not waterproof. You can't do this. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is take my decal, peel it off, and I'm just going to run it through the water quick, remove the excess, and now I'm going to center this. So I've got the launch lug facing downward, so I should be able to see this on the launch pad. Okay, and that looks pretty close to center. And now what I can do is go ahead and lay that down. Okay, now since it's not sticking very well at this point, if I find that, well, I got it a little bit off or something like that, I can easily peel it back up and put it on. Okay, I'm going to move this over. Now, once you've got this where you want it, then take a tissue or a soft cloth and you're going to squeegee out the water. All right, and that just moved on me. That's okay, because I can reposition it. As I said, this works better with vinyl decals. But I found that most of these kind of clear plastic ones will do it as well. It just takes a little bit more squishing. All right, but eventually what's going to happen is you're going to get all the water squeezed out of there, and any that's left will slowly evaporate, and you get a nice attachment once it actually does attach. With very few bubbles in it. Okay, now the alternative is to simply put these on, and I'm going to try it with one of these wraps here. Now the problem is, if these are dry, if you put them on and you get them in the wrong spot, they probably won't move very well. So in this case, I'm going to turn this over so the seam is going to be on the same side as the launch lug. And here I'm using the edge of the body tube as an alignment guide. All right, and it's already not wanting to do that. Okay, that looks pretty good. Alright, so you can see I didn't quite overlap. Now if I'm careful here, I can pull this back up and just realign it a little bit. Kind of keep some tension on it as I'm pulling it. Okay, so still a little bit off, but I'm going to call that good. Alright, so now I'm going to squish all the bubbles out of it. Okay, so you can use either method here. Now, as you can see, the one I used with the water, the edges are still trying to peel up. They'll do that. Once it dries out, they will go down again, so don't worry about that. All right. Since these are actually behaving fairly well, I'm going to go ahead and do this again without the water. And once more, I'm going to use the edge of the body tube there as a guide. It went on fairly well. Okay, now with the water one here, I would wait 24 hours before flying it, or you may end up losing it. Also, if you're going to clear coat this, and you really don't need to, but if you are, wait at least 48 hours on the water applied decals. Alright, so that's our whole rocket there. Hope you had a good time building this. Have a great flight and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.